The best landscape photos have a separate foreground and background, but it can be hard to get everything in focus all at once. Of course, you can use a high f-stop number like f22 to get as much depth of field as you can, but that's often still not enough to get something up close like a flower and something in the distance like a mountain in focus at the same time. Now, some of the great landscape photographers would use tilt-shift lenses, but those are outrageously expensive. Technique you can use is focus stacking, where you take multiple pictures focused up close and then focused incrementally further back until you focus on the background subject. Then you can combine all those together with software. So let's do that now. I'm gonna go ahead and focus on the closest subject here, these flowers, and then actually focus a little bit before them, because with all types of stacking, you can't take too many pictures, and if you focus a little bit closer and there's nothing there to worry about, then you can throw out that picture. But sometimes there are things in the foreground like a leaf that you might not notice when you're composing, and so getting that extra shot can help. So I'll back way up and take my first picture, and then I'll focus a little bit further away and take another picture, and I'm just going to repeat that process, focusing a little further out and snapping another shot until I get the entire subject in focus. Now, I've used a moderate f-stop number here, f8, and that helps to make a sharper picture. If I were to use a high f-stop number, like f22, my lens would start to have problems with diffraction. Because the opening in the aperture would be so small, it would start to actually interact with the individual photons, just a property of the physics that would, in the end, make a less sharp picture. So in that way, by allowing me to use a moderate f-stop number instead of a high f-stop number, I can actually get sharper pictures. Trade-off, of course, is a little more work in post. So I'm focusing further and further away until I get all the way to infinity. So with that shot, I'll take my pictures back to the PC and process them. So that was the fun part, being out in the sun and the flowers. This is the less fun part, being at the computer, but we're gonna try to do it as quick as possible. First, I'm gonna show you a couple of reasons why this isn't as easy as you might think. Here's a progression of 8 pictures where I took focusing from the front to the back. You can see this picture's focused most closely. You can see this flower in focus here. And as I progress through, focal plane moves further back. Now these flowers are in focus. A couple more. Now this middle ground here is in focus. A couple more, and now the building here is in focus. But I want you to look at the flowers that are out of focus here. You can see that as they get blurry, this is the original, this is out of focus, the blur actually makes the flowers appear larger, and that will be overlapping the background. So it's not as easy as just picking the pictures that show the background, because there's always going to be some part of the foreground out of focus and covering it. This happens more if you actually have your layers visually stacked. So this style of landscape photograph with the flowers that visually overlap the background adds a lot of depth to the picture. Compositionally, that's really powerful. From a focus stacking perspective, that makes it especially difficult. It would be much easier if there were just a log in the foreground visually below the mountains rather than something projecting in front of the background. So we're kind of playing this on hard mode. Another aspect that makes this hard is that the flowers are moving. And of course, again, this is a realistic scenario for landscape photography. Flowers are definitely the most common thing to put in the foreground of a landscape photo, and the wind always moves them. So look at these flowers here in the middle ground, and as I move between frames, you're going to see them moving around. Therefore, the picture that we use for the foreground subject and the picture that we use for the background subject, the flower will be in different positions. So there'll be parts of the background that we won't be able to scavenge correctly, and we'll definitely have to go in and fill those in. Another factor is, look at how wide angle or telephoto the picture is. So as I progress through these pictures, you can see the building actually seems to get a little bit smaller. So things can change size as you refocus, and it kind of depends on the physics of the lens. There's an element called focal breathing, where when you focus closer, the lens actually becomes a little more wide angle. So all these different factors together mean stacking these images is not as easy as stacking a panorama or an HDR. It can be done, but it's going to be manual no matter what you do. So the first thing I'm going to do is start out with a manual process using Photoshop and multiple layers. And then we'll move on to Photoshop's automated process, and then I'll show you the kind of results you can get with third-party software. You can also do this with the free software GIMP, though it might even be a little more challenging. So I've narrowed it down to 8 pictures. My first step here, I'm in Lightroom right now. I'm going to do any processing that needs to be done to all the pictures. So I've selected all the pictures. I have auto sync on here. And I can see looking at the histogram that part of this is overexposed. I want to make these adjustments to the raw files before I blend them together. So I think I want to just recapture a little bit of what's in the sky here. I don't want that to be blown out. Parts of this tent are a little blown out, but I think I'm going to be okay with that. And maybe I'll raise the shadows here in the foreground. Point being, do your processing to all the pictures before you bring them into Photoshop. So I'm happy with that. Jump back into the grid view. Now I'm going to right click them, edit in, and then open as layers in Photoshop. This is going to move all 8 pictures into Photoshop and stack them as different layers, because in Photoshop you can take 2 pictures and put one on top of the other and then blend different parts of them together. So that's basically what we're going to be doing. If you haven't worked with layers before, here are a couple of just quick examples of how to use them. You'll see this little eye picture next to a layer. Click that to turn off a layer. So you can see by turning off all these different layers, I can see the underlying layer. If I turn them all off, it disappears. Any layer that's on top of another layer will completely hide the underlying layer unless you add a layer mask. Layer mask allows you to choose which parts of a picture appear and which are completely hidden. So if we again turn off all of these layers, well, except for this top one, I'll add a layer mask to this top layer. This is the layer mask here, and you can see it's solid white. White shows that part of the layer, and black allows that part of the layer to be hidden, kind of erasing it and allowing underlying layers to show. So what I'll do here, you can see my color here is set to black. I will grab a brush and make my brush a little bit bigger. And now if I were to paint on here, you can see the black is showing up in the layer mask. Any place I paint black is shining through. And because there are no layers behind it, what you're seeing is this checkerboard pattern, which means it's invisible. There's nothing there. So now I'll go back and turn these layers back on. So now you can see, as I show and hide that layer, you can see by erasing that, I showed the underlying layer. So the first thing we're going to do with these layers is to align them. Because I was doing this handheld, that means the camera moved a little bit between shots. No problem. Photoshop can handle this really easily. You would think aligning layers would be under Layer, Align, right? Nope. It's under Edit, Auto Align Layers. The auto projection is just fine. So you can see my camera moved a little bit between shots. And for that reason, the images have, there's some room at the edges because there were parts of the pictures that didn't overlap perfectly. This is why you shoot a little bit wide and plan to crop. One of several reasons why you want to shoot a little wide and plan to crop with this image stacking. So now as I turn these off, we should see that that building in the background stays pretty perfectly aligned, and that looks good. It does seem like it stays aligned. Notice that I have the pictures arranged from front to back. This is probably the way it's going to come in automatically because it'll be sorted by name. You can see these file names here are incrementing. This will just make life a little bit easier. So now to manually focus stack these images, I'm going to start with that first one, and I'm going to paint black over the layer mask for any parts that I don't want to be in the first picture. So I'll back up and just ask myself, what do I want in this very first picture? And as I look at it, I can see this yellow flower here is nice and sharp. So I definitely want that, and these stems here are nice and sharp, so I want that too. I'm going to reset my colors here for the brush and select the layer mask. But this background, clearly that's going to come from a different picture. This part's going to come from a different picture too, because other pictures have this in focus. So I'm going to make my brush nice and big, and I'm just going to paint over all of this here. So as I let go, you can see the layer mask here is filling in. I'm just going to make sure I get all of that pretty well. And this flower could definitely be sharper. So I'm going to make multiple passes with this painting. I'm going to make really big passes with the brush to fill in lots of things. And then as I get closer and closer to it, I'm going to make my brush smaller and smaller, and I'm also going to make it harder and harder. The soft edge is good for blending layers together, but the harder edge is better for cutting a fine edge over something. So for this, I want to make sure I cut right around the edges of the flower, or else I'll see kind of ghosting. We'll crop these edges later. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. And as I look at the layer mask, I can see just this foreground part here is shown for that picture. If I hide it, you can see this part that's changing here is just what I'm pulling from the first picture. Everything else is coming from the second picture. But I need to hide parts of this picture too. Obviously, this background is bad. So I'm going to repeat that process. I'm going to make a layer mask, make my brush nice and big, select that layer mask, and make sure I'm painting black. And now I'm going to erase that layer too. So this stuff is out of focus in that second picture. So I'll just paint right over it. All these parts of the building. The parts that are already overlaid by the first picture, like this flower, it doesn't even matter. So I don't even have to worry about that. But this flower is actually pretty in focus, so I don't want to paint over that. I do want to make sure that I get these parts of the building and right up to the edges of this flower here. You can always go back and repaint this later if you screw it up. If you paint black over the layer mask and something gets less sharp, then you want to undo that. So now we can see the parts that I just painted over. Leave that turned on and turn the layer mask. For the third layer here, clearly the background here is still out of focus, so I'll paint over that. Now we're seeing the fourth picture. Oh, see, I painted over this part of it and it became less sharp. So I want to make sure I don't paint over that just yet. I want to keep those leaves from this particular picture, but I do want to make my brush small and get in here. Just hide that. Okay. Okay, so this, as I'm painting it out, it's still getting sharper, which means the picture behind it was more in focus than this current picture. So that's good. Stuff is getting sharper. That means you're doing it right. Okay, so you can see for that picture, I just pulled some of these leaves. That was about it. So for this picture, add another layer mask. Again, we know we can get rid of this background here. Oops, I'm painting white here. I need to be painting black. Never mind, I was painting black. Okay. Okay, good. So that stuff got sharper. That's good. Oh, I painted over that. It got blurrier, so I'll undo that. But this stuff definitely needs to come from one of the back pictures. So again, I need to paint a little closer to these edges here where they blend together. So I made my brush smaller. Get nice and get all this corner. Need to look at the little thumbnail there and just make sure I'm masking all this off well. That stuff's getting sharper. Oh, that's not good, so I'll undo that. You can see here I accidentally painted over part of this and it showed a leaf from another picture. So that's bad. So what I'm going to do is hit this little switch button here, and that switches me from painting black to painting white. So if I paint white in the layer mask here, then I'm showing that picture again. I can hit X to quickly switch between painting black and painting white. If I'm blowing your mind with the layer mask stuff, just do some research on layer masks in Photoshop. It's a really important tool to know how to use. I'm switching back to white so I can paint those leaves out because that's ugly. Okay, looking pretty good. I'll go on to the next picture. Again, we know, paint black again. We know all this needs to go away. Oh, I didn't paint the sky here well enough. I just switched to this other picture because I noticed I didn't paint the background. So now that building in the background is coming sharper and sharper and sharper. So you'll be doing a lot of this kind of revisiting layers to make sure that the masking is appropriate on all of them. And if it seems like it's time consuming and annoying, then you're doing it right. Okay, I just started painting black here, and that's bad. That's because I didn't have the layer mask selected. I had the picture selected. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that, Control Alt Z to undo it a couple of times. Then I'll go back and make sure I have the layer mask selected. Still just painting black on the layer mask to hide that particular picture. You can see this tent here is becoming sharper and sharper. Those flowers that are a little bit behind the other flowers are becoming sharper. Again, as I start to have to color in details here. There we go. I'm using a smaller and smaller brush. So these flowers that were behind these other flowers, you can see as I'm hiding them from this photo, they are becoming sharper. So that's a good thing. Just keep painting that. I'm just revealing the picture behind this picture with each pass. Picking and choosing which parts of the picture I want to use. Go on to the next layer, add another layer mask. Okay, so as I start to paint black here, you can see that even the picture behind this one is sharper for these parts of the picture. So I'm painting black layers here. Now this building is getting real nice and sharp. If a part of a picture is pulled from a foreground picture, then I don't have to worry about it. It doesn't matter if I paint the mask black for those parts of the picture, because I'm not seeing that for this picture anyway. They're being shown from one of the foreground pictures. So I can just go over here, the stuff that I know is already painted in. I don't have to worry about it. I can go a little bit faster. Parts of this building are not becoming sharper, which means that they're being pulled from one of the foreground pictures. So I need to back up a little bit and check to see which picture. Oh, I painted in the picture itself. Oh, there we go. I found the picture where the layer was not properly masked. So I'm just fixing that. That was not a good edit. Okay, we just have 2 layers left now. I'll add a layer mask for that. And again, I know this building is probably going to be sharper. Yep, so I'm painting black, and I do see the building becoming sharper and sharper. So I'll just keep painting that black. Oh, as I painted that, this foreground became a little less sharp, so I don't want to paint over that. So as I'm painting, if something becomes less sharp, I'm hitting Control Z to undo it. And then I go back and I just repaint it a little more carefully. Okay, so that's all looking pretty sharp. Now you don't have to add a layer mask to the last picture because the last picture, there's nothing behind it. So if I were to paint a layer mask, it would just become invisible. So this, in other words, is pretty close to the finished product, but we can see it's still not perfect. Now, as we look in closely here, we can see some ghosting. There's double flowers here because the flower moved between each individual frame. There are a couple of ways to handle this. For some of this, you're going to end up going back to the earlier layer masks and manually blending those in or out. So it's a laborious process. Let's zoom back out here. Control 0 to get back to filling the screen. And what I'm going to have to do is to figure out, with the blurry parts of the picture here, which layer this is coming from. So I'll just keep hiding layers until I see that go away. Okay. So it looks like it's part of this layer. Just by hiding and revealing layers, I can see where it's coming from. So I've got the mask selected and I'm painting black. I'm just going to remove this part of the layer. Just zoom in a little bit more. So I'm removing that and it's not fixing it, which means it's also coming from an upper layer. So let's see. Okay, so it's partly on here. So again, I'll select the mask and paint right over that, make that nice and sharp. Just getting right as close to the edge as I can. Yeah, let's get that out of there. Right along these leaves. Okay, so this particular layer is causing a little bit of the weirdness. Some of these flowers are coming from this layer here, because as I turn it off, you can see it gets a little bit better. So I'm going to go back and select that and just paint black over some of these parts just to make them a little bit better. Get rid of some of that ghosting. Oh, paint that white again. Yeah, so as I'm hiding this layer, I can see some parts of this are getting better. So any part that gets better when the layer is hidden, I want to go in and select the layer mask here and just paint that part black. So this all got better as that layer was hidden. Oh, paint the layer mask black. So I'll paint it black and just show more of that. Let's go through this layer by layer. I'm going to be turning each layer on and off. And I want to make sure that as I turn it off, no part is getting better. So as I hide this first layer, you can see some parts of the building here become more sharp. That means I want to go in and attack this layer mask. Oh, link that back up. So I select that, and with my brush black, I'm just going to paint over the parts that got better when the layer was hidden. So like this got better, which means it's pulling that part from this picture, but it's out of focus. So let's see what else gets better as I hide it. Okay, some of this got better. Let's see if anything else gets better here. All right, so some of this got better when the layer was hidden. So I'll just go in and paint the mask black for that, so I'm hiding that part of the picture. So a little bit more down here to hide. Maybe a little bit through here. Okay. So look at the next layer and look for stuff that's getting better when I'm hiding it. Yeah, so some of this got better as I hit it. Oh, painting the wrong layer. Okay, there we go. Let's see, what else gets better as I hide it? Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Hiding the third layer to see if anything gets better. Definitely seems like everything's just getting worse as I hide it, so that layer's good. See if anything gets better with this layer. No, everything seems worse when that's hidden. Is anything getting better with this layer hidden? Visible, hidden, visible, hidden. Okay, so some of this needs to go. Need to make sure I'm painting in the right layer mask. So this needs to go. Oh, no, that's all right. Some of these parts. Okay. That layer doesn't seem to do anything. It's almost completely hidden. Look at this layer to see if anything gets worse when it's hidden. Nope, that looks pretty good. Okay, so what we have here is a pretty good example of the focus stacking. The foreground flowers are in focus, the building here in the background is in focus, but we still see a few artifacts. We see that these flowers here have a little bit of ghosting, and that can be, that's ugly. So some of this you're just going to end up fixing through the process of cloning and healing. So what I'll normally do now is I'll save this. I'm going to save this as a PSD file or a TIFF, either way. But I want to save all these layers because I'm going to lose those in just a little bit. So let's call this stacked flowers at Harkness. So while that's still saving, I'm going to go ahead and just crop it in, just get rid of all the junk on the outside. All these weird edges here, just get rid of that. We don't need to see this over there. Okay. So I'll crop that so we don't have to worry about that anymore. And now what I'm going to do is select all these layers and go to the layer menu, and I'm going to flatten the image. So that gets rid of all those different layers. Now I just have one picture. I'm going to save this again as something different. Just call that flattened and save it. Now it's a much smaller picture because it's only got one layer. It means it's much easier to deal with. We're going to have to go in and just fix these issues through stamps and cloning. So I'm selecting the stamp tool here and make my edge a little bit bigger. And this is just classic cloning. I'm going to hold down the Alt key to select part of the picture and then just clone it over. Oh, that was too much. Usually for the cloning, you want a nice soft brush. So I'm going to pick a nice soft brush. The soft brush just makes the edges a little bit softer. So I need to obviously repair this part. I don't want the yellow flower here. So I'm just gonna, let's see, where can I grab that from? Maybe I can grab it from there. Just basically need to hide that flower. Looks a little artificial. So I'm just copying over parts of the picture. It's not gonna be perfect. Cloning is really a last resort. And this might fail under like a very close inspection, but my goal here is just to get it to be good enough. So here we see some obvious cloning artifacts, and that's not good. So you just kind of cover that up as best as you can. Did I mention this is not a perfect science? It's just not. I'm going to try to repair this a little bit. Let's see, take part of this brick and just cover up some of this yellow. Nope, that wasn't a good edit. A little bit of ghosting here, and we lost some of the detail in the bricks there, so kind of ugly. Just paint over that as best as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the picture that formed the background here. Oh, that's my PSD file. That's a PSD file too. Okay, so here's the actual background picture. I'm going to open this back up in Photoshop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow parts of it and layer it back over my picture. So Control A, Control C to copy the entire thing. Then I'm going to paste it here. It comes in as a new layer. Zoom back out by pressing Control 0. And you can see it's not perfectly aligned. So I'm going to select both those layers and then repeat the auto align process. What I'm doing now is a patching process. I'm taking the original pictures that I might need and patching it back in. And so you could do that with the individual layers before we flatten them. It's kind of a last resort. So I actually want layer 0 to be on top of it. So what I'm going to do now is add a layer mask to layer 0, which is our blended image, and then just paint parts of that layer mask black here. Oh, I don't want the clone stamp, I want the brush tool. Okay, so I'm blending in some parts of the original rearmost image, but as I'm doing that, I'm finding that some of it's messed up just because the flowers moved. And in which case, there's not much I can really do except just to clone over those parts. That's definitely going to happen anytime you have a moving subject. But I'm still painting black in the layer mask and some of these things just to make those parts of it sharper. Okay. So we can see all this is still getting sharper as I'm painting in parts of the background. They're getting better, so that's good. Oh, that wasn't great. Okay, so unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do here because anytime I paint in too far, as I erase this, you can see the blurred flower edges moved to cover up this part of the building. And it's also not anything great I can clone from, but I will try using a clone stamp for part of this. Just to add a little more detail there. Looks better, right? Not perfect, but better. Okay. So that won't hold up to close inspection, but it's not bad. So as we zoom back, overall at this scale, I think it ended up looking pretty good. Oh, I need to recrop it again because part of the original picture got pulled in. So we're going to recrop that. And at this point, we'll call it done. So we can see our finished product versus, say, the original product here. We'll do a compare of the two. And you can see it's clearly better. The building is in focus. The flowers are in focus. not a perfect shot. Focus stacking with any sort of moving subject is going to be a laborious and time-consuming process. Now I'll show you a couple of other ways to do it. Much of that process that I just did in Photoshop could be automated. So let's go ahead and select those first 8 pictures again. And this time we're going to right-click them, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop, just as before. So we're opening all those as layers. So once again, I'm just going to auto-align those layers, selected them all, auto-align layers, automatic. And now, again, I'm going to return to the edit menu, and this time I'm going to choose auto blend layers. This will do the image stacking automatically for me, but you'll see that there's a reason I went through and did it manually. And you can see it did an okay job. The building here is definitely in focus, but there's just a ton of ghosting. You can see it did the exact same thing that we did manually. It added layer mask to all these pictures and then picked what it thought was the right part for each picture. So now you could go back and repair this manually, but I find that exceptionally difficult. It's exceptionally difficult to figure out which parts it decided to borrow from each individual picture. And because it only uses the sharpest parts of each picture, as you hide any individual layer, it doesn't show the underlying layer, it shows nothing. So not only do you need to erase parts of the upper layers, but you would need to paint in the mask of the lower layer that you want to take it. And for me, in all but the most perfectly aligned photos with all still subjects and no overlap, I find it easier just to do it manually. I also want to show you the output from Helicon. Here's the sample produced by Helicon. So you can see the ghosting here is pronounced and weird. It became very painterly. So I want you to know I've investigated all the various manual or various automated applications, and none of them worked better than manually adding layer masks to them. Nonetheless, when you can't achieve the depth of field that you need for a landscape photo, focus stacking is a useful technique. It's time consuming, it requires patience, but that will pay off with the results and with a unique photo that you could not have gotten any other way. I hope this video helped out. Thanks so much.